Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Trent.
Thank you so much for making some time to come and fly with Trent here on the YouTubes. It's a treat to have you here. So, by way of introducing you to my audience, let's start off with your name, how old you are, where you're from, and what do you fly right now?
All right. Well, I'm Jeff Barkas. I live in Southern California and currently flying a Phenom 300.
A Phenom 300. That's a pretty pimp jet.
Yeah, it's pretty nice to fly.
Yeah, I call that the James Bond jet. There's a guy at my airport that's got a Phenom 300.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah. So, and how many hours do you have now?
Total time is about just over 3,000 hours.
Just over 3,000. Okay, so let's unpack because your story and reviewing the messenger message stream that we had before getting together for this interview, you kind of had some stops and starts and you've been at this for a while. It's not been just a clear sailing, as it were. And once I learned from you what I did, that's why I invited you onto the show, because I do think that there's probably some takeaways for the Career 2.0 folks that are in my audience, myself included,
Right.
and how you got to where you're at. So just kind of high level, when did you get your commercial license? Then what happened? Then what happened? And COVID happened. Just giving us a high level overview.
Yeah, I can tell you, I got my private instrument back in the 90s. Couldn't really make a career out of it. Back then, it was just too hard. Put everything away, had a family. And then back in about 2016 ish, I decided this is what I wanted to do. And so I was listening to a podcast, another podcast, and they were talking about how it's not too old. At the time, I was 48 years old, and it's not too late to start. And I kind of came back from that trip and started to make phone calls to find out what I had to do to proceed through this journey. And I basically started that day that I got back, scheduling with flight schools, and came back and then got my commercial license. Took me about 6 months to get current again. I didn't touch an airplane for 25 years. So I
Yeah.
had to learn GPSs, I had to learn all that stuff. So it took me about 6 months to get the flight review done, the instrument currency done, and then I started working on the commercial, which I got somewhere around late 2017.
Okay. And you're multi in and around that same time as well.
Multi I put off until the very last minute.
Oh, okay.
So I did the commercial, and then I did my CFII, then my CFI, and after I was teaching for a while, I went down and then got the multi done.
Okay. And you said teaching for a while. How long were you a CFI for? And sort of when you stopped, how many hours did you have?
When I started, again, because I probably got a lot more time than a lot of the typical CFIs. I had right around 600 hours because it counted the time from back in the 90s,
Yeah.
which was about 200 of that. So it was, I instructed for about 2 years, year and a half,
Right.
2 years. Got hired by an airline and started doing my ATP, CTP in March of 2020 with COVID.
Yeah.
And so
Perfect timing.
perfect timing. Couldn't have been better. At the end of the ATP course, they said, we're going to send you home and see what happens. And then they closed down at the end of March that year. So they never brought me back. And I went back to teaching, but on a very limited basis, just mainly to
Yeah.
stay current and work with some of the students who I still had who are still training.
Okay. And the gig that you have now, that was sort of your next job after the post-COVID barely teaching dry spell. Is that right? Do I have it?
I was flying a CJ3. I got a job at Fly Exclusive flying their CJ3s coming out of COVID, and
Okay.
then stayed there for about a year. And now I'm flying for FlexJet.
Okay. So that's where I want to sort of dive a little deeper into your story. So let's go back to the CJ3, pre CJ3. You're just very part-timely instructing. You've got some hours. How did you go about getting that job? Was that, you saw it somewhere and applied and lucked out, or was it networking, or how did that come to be?
Yeah, it was a little bit of resume building, so to speak. I actually got a tentative job offer from a local company flying a CJ3. They had single pilot qualified pilots in there. They just needed a guy in the right seat. It's a Part 91 job. And when I came back, they said, well, we need you to do a contract trip first before we can get you into training. I said, okay, we did the contract trip. And then the PIC gave us 2 weeks notice. So they said, well, we're not going to hire you. So I did have about 6 hours of CJ3 time on my resume, as, obviously couldn't count it as total time, but it was on there and it was experience. And so when I applied to Fly Exclusive, was flying CJ3s. I think that helped get that job, but it was just through an advertising through one of the job boards that are out there.
Okay, so nothing, no special story there. You put in a resume, you got a call, you did the interview. Let's talk a little bit about the interview because I see a lot of people asking for help with interview prep in the various Facebook groups that I'm in. How long was the interview? Was it deep in the weeds about the technical aspects of flying and the regs and so forth, or were they more looking to see if you were a cultural fit for the organization?
I would say when you're looking at 135, it's way more of the cultural fit.
Yeah,
They're not trying the regs and stuff like that. I think they assume if you have, 1,500 hours, you've been a CFI, you're pretty good with that side of it.
yeah.
And they're going to teach you what you need to know. But, you're a little bit different. You're hanging out with someone for 8 days or more in a row. They want to know that it's going to be a smooth rotation.
Yeah, they want to know you're not going to be annoying.
Exactly. So both FlexJet and Fly Exclusive, they were more. I felt they were way more personality based. I don't think either one asked a single technical question at all in either interview.
And the CJ3, does it require a type rating?
It does. Yes, it does.
It does. Okay. And so you didn't have that type rating yet when you applied for the role, is that right?
Correct.
Interesting. So I would have thought, outsider looking in, I would have thought, oh gosh, they've got all sorts of applications from guys with type ratings. Why do you suppose that you were the guy that they picked? Do you think it was that there wasn't a lot of other applicants, or was it something on your resume that really kind of caught their eye, or did you do an extraordinary cover letter? What do you think it was?
In all honesty, I would put it down to timing. I did fly a CJ1 for right as I got to 1,500 hours as a right seater, again, not typed, single pilot airplane. And I just kind of took up, space in the right seat.
Hmm.
So I at least had some experience with the airplane. So that probably helped my resume a little bit. But, I think a lot of it right now, the 135 world, they're really hurting for, and really the larger 135 operators are really hurting for pilots now, and they just need to hire more people. So I think it was not a lot of people applying, or not as many as they needed. Having
Hmm.
some experience in the CJ3, even though it was very limited, didn't have the type rating or anything else. So I think that was pretty much it.
Okay.
And I only had about 80 multi hours at the time of getting that job.
And how long did you keep that job for?
A year.
A year. And in that year, roughly, do you remember how many hours you were able to log in the year? And we'll go answer that one first, and I'll just ask some more.
Yeah, I think it was about 600 hours.
Okay, so that's not bad. I mean, it's not as many as you could get as a flight instructor, but it's turbine time. So.
Right. And it got me my ATP. It gave me the type rating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a better step at that point than flight instructing. It was definitely a better move to do.
And were you living in base or did you have to commute?
They have a floating fleet, so it was an 8 and 6 rotation, on 8 and then off 6.
Okay.
So day 1 they fly you to the airplane, and day 8 they fly you home to wherever your base is.
What's market salary range for a job like that these days?
Well, I would say that company in particular was a starter company where a lot of people, it's their first job
Yeah.
to get into. And depending on the schedule you choose, it was somewhere at that time around 75 to $85,000 a year,
Okay.
plus bonuses.
Okay. And then after a year, you've now got 600 hours of turbine time in your logbook,
Right.
and you've got a much, more robust resume. So the company you're with now, which is FlexJet, so you see that opportunity on a job board somewhere and thought, hey, I'm going to apply for this, or was it some other method?
Yeah, it was someone I knew who had worked with me at the previous company that came over, and I had kept in contact with him. And then he said, hey, you should come over, interview here. And it's kind of what I did. And it's definitely the next step up of a company.
Hmm.
I wouldn't consider it where you're going to start. They do have a lot of people at 1,500 hours who they're currently hiring. Back a few years ago, they were much harder to get hired at
Yeah.
than right now, just because the industry in general.
And how many hours a month are you logging in the Phenom now?
It's about the same, around like 50 a month,
Okay.
give or take.
Okay. The work rotation, what does that look like? How many days away? How many days home?
It's about the same. It's although it's not a fixed 8 and 6 schedule like the other company was. You bid on a schedule, but it's working out to be pretty much like an 8 and 6 rotation.
Okay. And salary range probably a little higher, I'm guessing, because it's
Yeah, quite a bit higher.
quite a bit.
Yeah, it's about. I think if you work their minimum days on their first year pay, your base salary is 108, I believe,
Okay.
105 to 108, and then you have bonuses on top of that.
Okay. So not bad for especially for getting to fly such a cool jet.
Right,
And remind me how old you are now?
55.
55. Okay, so you're basically just a year and change older than me. Do you ever aspire to get to the airlines? Or are you really digging the Part 135 world?
When I first started the journey, when I got back into it, it was kind of like an open book. I'll see where it takes me.
Yeah.
Now, quite frankly, with the time that was wasted with the COVID and all that, I feel like it kind of there's not enough runway for me to make at an airline. I could probably get on at a major at this point with the hours, but the first 10 years at a major, quality of life isn't so great. You're on reserve.
Yeah.
I'm not really close to a base of a lot of the companies, so
Yeah.
that would be tough. So the 135, and I like the 135. I like the randomness of it. I like the fact that we can start the day in Van Nuys and end the day in Palm Beach, and you just don't know where it's going to take you the next day.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's really just at the whims of wherever your small group of passengers feel like going.
Right. Yeah, and we just get notified the day before where we're going the next day, and even that'll sometimes change. So
Yeah. And unlike an airline where they've got, people who are planning the flights for you because they're, planned well in advance, you guys are planning the flights because you don't know where you're going until the day before or maybe 2 days before.
yeah, at the current company, they do all the flight
Oh, they
planning.
do. Okay.
Yeah, they're not licensed dispatchers, so we still have to verify the plan,
Okay.
but they file the flight plans and all that stuff. Previous company, yeah, the captain would do the flight planning
Okay.
in that case. So
Is there anything that you don't like about working for a 135 operation?
I would say the biggest downside is that it's a lot more work. I mean, you're loading bags, you're helping the passengers, you're outside when it's raining, outside when it's snowing. You have to do a little more work that way. You're not just walking into the airplane making a left-hand turn.
Yeah.
But that could also, in some ways, be a positive. I mean, my thing is, I don't know how I would have handled repetitiveness of airline life. To me, going to the same airports over and over, I think I would end up getting a little bit bored with.
Hmm.
And so being able to do other things kind of just keeps the day fresh.
Yeah, fair enough. So, for my benefit and hopefully also the benefit of the audience, I just want to ask you for some advice because you're further along than me. So I'm right now CFI, CFII, MEI, multi-engine rating, just past 500 hours here a couple of days ago. And thanks to this very YouTube channel, I get a very steady supply of students. I'm usually booked out 6 or so weeks in advance, and I'm able to fly 25 hours a week, usually, so 100 hours a month. So it's a lot of flight time, and I'm building my time
Right,
quickly, and the pay is fairly well also because I'm not being paid, as an employee, like a flight instructor kid who's getting like 22 bucks an hour.
right,
So I could continue along this path all the way to 1500 hours. I'm in the SkyWest pilot cadet program. I would assume they're going to make me a CJO, then they're going to enroll me in just like everything that happened for my mentor who is now at SkyWest. But as I've been interviewing folks like you, I learn new things and I see new opportunities and pathways. And so now I'm at this place where I don't have to make a decision yet, but I'm trying to figure out like, all right, what I just described to you, we'll just call that plan A. Because when I started this channel, that was the plan. But now I see this plan B route of, maybe contract business jet pilot. I interviewed a guy not so long ago. Maybe you saw the interview. Day rates for the right seat are kind of like $1,000 and up, and day rates for the left seat can be a couple $1,000 and up.
right.
Now that you have some of your experience and hindsight to your benefit, if you were in my shoes just at 500 hours, what would you do?
That's a great question. I think the industry is a little different than it was even back coming out of COVID. You really had the majors. If you're not sure about the airlines, the majors used to not hire people with strictly 135 time. They wanted to see 1,000 hours of 121 time.
Hmm.
if you chose the path early on in your career to go down the 135 route, you're pretty much staying there. And now they've opened up the doors where the major airlines are hiring straight from 135 and using some of your 135 time, depending on the plane that they're using.
Mm-hmm.
So, in my mind, if I had to do it over again, and if I felt the airlines were an issue, and I kind of recommend people do this now, is I would recommend people try 135. Regional hiring has slowed down quite a bit because they can't keep their pilots and they
Mm-hmm.
just don't have the captains to pair you up with.
Mm-hmm.
So you fly 135, you're getting more hours. You get from your CGO to training is a faster time frame. From training to being on the line is a faster time frame. The hours that you fly, you'll be well beyond the hours of 121 regional flying um, in that first year.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then it opens up doors to you. Do you go to a major? Do you go to a ULCC? Do you go to, do you stay 135? Do you like that kind of flying? And so it gives you an experience. I think that's the great thing about the industry that we're in. There's so many different ways that you can build up those hours. And you can just try them all if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
There's people who fly caravans as seaplanes down in the Bahamas to build up time. Someone I worked with, she built her time up in Guam. She flew over there and just built up her time flying twins down there in Guam, around the islands. So there's all kinds of different ways you can do it depending on your life and what you have going on. But I think now that the majors, even at our company, we're losing a ton of people to the majors, and they're taken right from the 135 world now.
At 1,500 or more hours, though, still, it's not like that has changed.
Yeah, I mean, two of the captains I've flown with at my current company at 24, one was 24, one's 25, and they're leaving for Delta. I mean, that's really early to be
Mm-hmm.
getting into a career at Delta.
Mm-hmm. So the it all sounds good to me, but the one reservation that I have is if I went, let's say I went on a big push and I was able to get a 135 job. From what I'm hearing from you, maybe only I'm going to get 50 hours a month versus the flight instructor hours of I'm able to get 100 hours a month. Is that about, first of all, is my assumption of 50 hours a month, is that reasonably accurate for 135 right seat guy?
Yeah, I think that's pretty close. Yeah, I think that's pretty fair.
Okay.
It was, yeah, I think that's about what I averaged if I did the math on that.
And do you think that if I was, because there's a few 135s here in Boise and I have a resume into one of them. Um, but I'm wondering is would I be able to continue to flight instruct and fly 135 to try and squeeze the lemon twice in a month, so to speak?
It would be tough. I mean, it depends on the students. I happen to have a few students. Like I said, when I came back, I seem to get the second career students,
Yeah.
right? The guys who have a career and they want to maybe learn to fly and see where it takes them.
Yeah.
So their schedules were just as flexible, and they just wanted to know when I was going to be in town, so I could continue to train them. Um, so it's possible, but you're probably not going to get both hours. You'd probably end up somewhere around 75 hours total per month between the two jobs
Okay.
versus the 100.
Okay.
Uh, the difference is once you get to 1,500 hours, is you're going to have way better
Oh,
quality
oh
time
yeah. I mean,
by having that 135 experience.
yeah, like I almost wouldn't mind if it took 2 or 3 months longer if I had so much more turbine time in my logbook on the way there.
Right. And one of my students just took a job flying a Lear at 1,000 hours, right seat in a Lear. Not sure if he's planning on going to the airlines, but when he hits that 1,500 hours, he'll have 500 hours in a right seat of a Learjet. So it's going to be a pretty good resume plus great experience for him.
Yeah,
And
no
it'll
kidding.
help him decide whether he wants to stay 135 or go 121. He may find he just hates it.
So, what advice would you give me and others who want to start looking for a 135 job?
I think the key right now, the 135 jobs when you're below 1,500 hours aren't fantastic. I mean, they're going to be beginner type of jobs. And some of them you got to be really cautious about whether it's actually loggable time.
If they don't have
Like
a
I said, the first
PDP?
one, right? First one I did, I asked them specifically if, hey, can I log this time? And they said, yep, we have the training program. Okay, great. And then I kept asking them for a copy of the op spec showing that. And 4 months in, they said, oh, yeah, I guess we didn't really get that
Oh.
op spec. So it didn't matter. I was already hired by an airline at that point.
Mhm.
And this was going to be a job that I just did to gain some jet experience, which I still got, but the hours weren't loggable. I didn't need it. I was still flight instructing. So it was okay. It was fine. But I know people who get into that and thinking, okay, now that I have 1,500 hours, I'm going to get a job. And we had someone in one of my interview classes where they found out the time that they had was not count. They weren't able to count that time,
Yeah.
and they removed them from the class. So you do see that.
Yeah, and just so the audience understands what you're talking about, if you have an aircraft that requires only a single pilot, the right seat time may not be loggable unless they have a pilot development program in place. That's what PDP stands for. So if you find
Correct.
yourself in that scenario, having just heard what Jeff said, make sure you see the documentation. Trust but verify, as other people have said.
Absolutely. Yep, and it does, and there's a lot of them. I mean, there's caravan jobs, there's King Air jobs. Most of those aren't loggable unless they have that time.
Mhm.
Still gives you the experience. It just doesn't give you the time. So if you need it for the time, be careful.
Mhm. So from what you just said, you said at Part 135 jobs until you have 1,500 hours really aren't very good. It sounds to me like I should just keep doing what I'm doing.
Right, and you could, again, depending on your experience. I think speed wise, it was one of the things I had to decide. I knew every day I waited was one day less in my career at the end
Yeah.
of it. Right, I was running up against that clock like you are. Especially if you decide to go airlines with the 65. Um, so I kind of looked at that and felt you got to get it done as quickly as possible. I flight instructed as much as I possibly could while working a full time job outside of that.
Mhm.
I was burning the candle at both ends, um, and that's a great way to go. Once you get to 1,500 hours, and this is something else to think about. A lot of people think the airlines are just there and they're just going to hire you at 1,500. And like I said, that's where the regionals. Some of them are slowing down their hiring. Some of them are giving you those 2-year training contracts that you got to be careful with. That's not a bad time to try a 135 job because you will get the turbine time
Mhm.
at FlexJet. You can upgrade to a captain within 6 months. So you're doing turbine PIC time.
Mhm.
If your goal is to get to an airline, that's a lot more experience than you'll ever get at a regional, and you'll get through it faster. So if your goal is to get to a major, 135 is not a bad way to look at getting there. And you may figure that, or you may realize that you like that flying better
Yeah.
than the 121 stuff, and you stay there and you make a career out of it.
And a FlexJet captain, what does their first year pay look like?
You're pushing around 150,
Okay.
with the bonuses in there, and yeah, it's pretty decent pay now.
Yeah. All right. Is there anything, if you were interviewing yourself, is there anything that we haven't covered yet that for my audience of career 2.0 guys, basically a bunch of guys like you and me with less time than you, is there anything that we haven't really talked about that you think we would be remiss if we didn't cover before we wrap up our interview today?
I think the key for those people who are considering it a career,
Yeah.
2.0, is to get started,
Yeah.
is to make the phone call to flight schools. Even like when I first started doing that, in my mind, when I first made that phone call, I didn't know where I was going to end up. And even when I passed my CFI check ride, I came back to the flight school, and one of the CFIs said to me, "So you're going to instruct here?" And I said, "Quite frankly, I haven't even thought about that. My goal was to get the commercial, get the CFI. I actually did my double I first,
Hmm.
and then my single I. And my goal was to get those done. And I just kind of assumed something was going to come in and hinder that. So I didn't think that far in advance, but I just knew that if I waited, it wasn't going to happen. If I analyzed the situation, fortunately, as career 2.0 guys, hopefully you have some money saved up and you can afford, if I spent $3,000 or $5,000 to get my commercial done, and it turned out that a pandemic hit that was worse than COVID, you know, I was willing to walk away from that money.
Hmm.
I think it's important that they get started now, because if you wait or you overanalyze the situation and you wait 6 months or a year to actually get started, then it may be too late.
Mhm.
and you're going to lose a lot of money at the end of the career that, in this industry is limited by age.
It is indeed. So, folks, if you've just listened to what Jeff said and you're thinking, hey, I want to get started, just so that you know, you can fly with Trent. If you go to flywithtrent.com, I regularly have most of my students actually come in from out of town because they find me here on YouTube, and they'll come to town for a month or 6 weeks, and we fly a lot, typically 5 days a week. And so they're able to make progress very, very quickly. So you get all sorts of information about that on my website. There will be a Fly with Trent drop down, training with Trent, something like that, and you can read about the aircraft and the rates and so forth and so on. If you have any questions, feel free to send me those either just down in the comments below this video, or if you use Instagram and you want to direct message me on Instagram, you can do that as well. Jeff, for anyone that wants to ask you questions, is there a way that you don't mind receiving those questions?
Yeah, they can look me up on Facebook and direct message me there, Instagram.
Okay. So maybe what we'll do is we'll put a link to one of your social profiles. We'll put it down in the description, to make it a little easier for them to find you. And then if you would be kind enough to just keep an eye on this video after it's published, I'll notify you, so that, because there'll be questions in the comments as well. And I know from past interviews, I don't always have the answer to the questions, and sometimes the questions aren't for me; they're for you. So
Right,
I'll uh,
absolutely.
I'll make sure that you're aware of that. So thank you so much, Jeff, for coming to fly with Trent here for a little while at our desks, and share with my community some of your experience. I hope, folks, that you found Jeff's interview helpful. If you have, make sure you give him an attaboy or a shout out or a high five in the comments. Maybe consider smashing that like button so that the YouTube algorithm will show this video to more people. For that, you have my gratitude. And Jeff, I really appreciate you making some time to be here.
That was great, Trent. Thanks.